Okay, here we go. Boom! So, this is a response video to Essence of Thought's recent video, Rationality Rules proves himself a transphobic hack, in which I will not be defending Rationality Rules' Stephen Woodford from the charge that he is a hack, but nevertheless at the end of this video you may decide that it's somewhat the pot calling the kettle black for Peter / Ethel over at Essence of Thought to be levelling those kinds of claims against anybody else. I'll leave you to decide that. As I go on with this video, I will be adopting a similar approach to the approach that Essence of Thought took, taking a piece-by-piece approach to respond to the parts of his video that I deem it worthwhile for me to respond to. Very similar approach to Essence of Thought, but just with the addition perhaps of a thing called charisma. A lot of you will have been following these series of exchanges, of course, between these two individuals on this subject of trans women in sport. Perhaps because you, like me, have an interest in this subject yourself. Or it could be because you don't like one or two of these particular actors involved, or because you don't like either actor that is involved. Nevertheless, I think it is pretty much drawing to a close. Stephen Woodford has definitely, I think, made his last video. Although Essence of Thought has responded to him, I think that Stephen Woodford's in a bit of a difficult position here. Of course, he'll get some criticism for not responding because it means he doesn't have a response. But if he does respond, he'll be panned even more for fanning the flames of the whole debacle. Quite honestly, I am not in that category, so I am going to make a response to the bits which it is germane for me to make a response to. There is a lot of material to cover here today, folks, but I think you will find some of it interesting. What I want to do before I get onto that is to outline my position as to how I would repurpose sport, so that then you can view the rest of this video in the light of what I'm proposing, and what I proposed, by the way, in a video entitled Solving the Gender Conundrum on the 8th of March, 3 weeks before Stephen Woodford had made his first video that had kicked this particular spat off, and indeed before the Court of Arbitration for Sport had issued their executive summary in their decision involving Caster Semenya and the IAAF. Notwithstanding that, the first thing that I'm going to do before I outline my position, because it's very relevant to it, is to read you a paragraph from that executive summary. The panel accepts the IAAF submission that reference to a person's legal sex alone may not always constitute a fair and effective means of making that determination. This is because the reason for the separation between male and female categories in competitive athletics is ultimately founded on biology rather than legal status. The purpose of having separate categories is to protect a class of individuals who lack certain insuperable performance advantages from having to compete against individuals who possess those insuperable advantages. In this regard, the fact that the person is recognised in law as a woman and identifies as a woman does not necessarily mean they lack those insuperable performance advantages associated with certain biological traits that predominate in individuals who are generally, but not always, recognised in law as males and self-identify as males. It is human biology, not legal status or gender identity, that ultimately determines which individuals possess the physical traits which give rise to that insuperable advantage and which do not. So that summary came out 3 weeks after I'd made my video on the 8th of March, but it shows that the IAAF endorsed the reasoning that I'd used in my video, and in fact the Court of Arbitration for Sport agreed with the IAAF on that principle. That what is important here, what is the actual axis of differentiation, is not the gender that you identify as, but it is the physiological characteristics that are associated with your biological sex. That is the point of having that segregation in the first place. Duly, as a result of that, what I suggested is that whilst ever we keep the present paradigm we have of male and female sport dressed up as men's and women's sport, all we can do is keep tinkering around at the edges and trying to fudge some kind of solution. Because male and female sits here and men and women sit here. Gender identity does not always tally up with biological sex. What I suggested then is that the time has come now to repurpose sport, to have a fundamental paradigm shift in terms of the segregated categories we have, to take account of the new reasoning we have in terms of differentiating gender identity from biological sex, and the way in which we've repurposed the terms man and woman to reflect that. Sport has not taken account of that. If it doesn't take account of that, it will continue to run into these issues. What I proposed is that we did away with the categories of men's and women's sport, okay? Not done away with segregating sport, but let's give them more explicit labels and labels that are more relevant to what is important here. So what I suggested is that we replace them with two categories. One will be a category female, effectively running along the lines that it's a segregation for the group that we're intending to protect, biological females, but with the particular point that what we're really looking at is what is sometimes called sport sex, to allow for those few cases such as those with complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, in which case you can be 46XY with a set of testes, but because your body is completely insensitive to the testosterone that is being produced, you nevertheless, in a physiological sense that is relevant to sport, have a female body. So in terms of sport sex, a category that is set aside for female athletes, and then alongside that, not a category for male athletes, because male athletes do not need that protection. Instead, let's kind of provide the same asymmetric protection that we provide with weight categories, that we provide with age categories, and so have an open category. An open category that makes no comment on your biological sex or on your gender identity or on your legal sex. A category that is open to males, that is open to females, that is open to people with intersex conditions, that is open to those that are cis, those who are trans, those who are non-gender binary, who, by the way, have to make a choice at the moment as to which they are going to identify as for sporting purposes, not any more. This is a category which, if you compete in it, it says nothing whatsoever about your gender identity. You compete as your gender identity, but without being pigeonholed by dint of the category you're competing in. That runs alongside a female category that is effectively for those in a sports sex sense who are biologically female, and yes, that includes trans men who have not taken cross-sex hormone therapy. So that category is not trans-exclusionary, it allows trans men who fulfill that category. I think that does two things. It gets us away from this differentiation between gender identity and sex, and it makes it clear that the protected characteristic is that which we intended it to be, which was biological sex. And two, it is only applied, the protection is only applied to female athletes. It is an asymmetric protection, female and open, in the same way as we have age opens versus age-banded events for older athletes. Okay, I want you to bear that in mind as we move forward. That is what I am proposing. So when you see some of the objections that are made, you can frame those objections in terms of the fundamental repurposing that I've proposed. Okay, on with the video. So let me start playing you a few chunks of what Essence of Thought had to say, and I'll give you my response to those.
You see, I believe the burden of proof is on Woodford, who believes trans women should be blocked from certain sports. And fact is, the IAAF would agree if it were consistent. When it came to the Pistorius case study and the referenced article, they accepted full burden of proof. They had to show how prosthetics offered a net advantage. That was a standard they were subsequently found to have failed to live up to, and as a result, the Court of Arbitration for Sport ruled in Pistorius' favour.
Okay, so Essence of Thought here is commenting on the Oscar Pistorius example that I had used in my video and then Stephen Woodford had picked up and used in his video. And what he's trying to advocate here is because the IAAF duly accepted that they had a burden of proof in that case, that they have the same burden of proof in the case of trans women, biological males effectively, competing in a segregated category for biological females. I propose that that is a fallacious argument because the starting conditions are different. If we had only invented sport yesterday and had no understanding of the physiological sporting differences between biological males and biological females, then I would concede the point to Essence of Thought, and I would say, yes, the IAAF has exactly the same burden of proof. That is not the case. We have had over a century now of male and female sporting performance to look back on, an assessment of their sporting performance and the physiological metrics that underpin that performance. That is not the same with prosthetic legs. Indeed, if you see somebody perambulating down the street on a prosthetic leg, you would probably draw the conclusion that the only person they are liable to beat in a 400 metres race would be an asthmatic pensioner. They certainly would not be in the position where we would have an expectation of them winning a medal. Okay, because we do not regard prosthetic limbs from the outset as giving a performance advantage in terms of a biological limb that is evolved for millions of years to allow us to run on. That is the difference here. So we have this different starting assumption. We're starting from a blank canvas in terms of these carbon fibre blades. And so duly the IAAF says, yes, it is incumbent upon us then to show that these kind of prosthetic limbs provide some kind of an advantage. That is simply not the case with maleness. And what confuses me is that Essence of Thought seemed to accept that earlier on in his video.
But moving on, when discussing whether or not trans women on HRT retain some sort of advantage over cis women, it's not enough to point out any advantage they may have had prior HRT.
So in some ways at this point, interestingly, we're all on the same page. We are all understanding that there is an advantage to male development, to male physiology, that amounts over an array of sports to about a minimum of a 10 or 11% performance advantage. It's greater in some areas, but in something such as a running race over 400 metres, Oscar Pistorius' difference, it would amount to 10 or 11%. So let's apply that to the Oscar Pistorius example, so that rather than the fallacious reasoning that Essence of Thought gave us, we can provide a more sound analogy. Imagine if the kinds of carbon fibre blades that Oscar Pistorius ran on had been run on for decades now. The data was in and we knew that it provided a 10 or 11% advantage over 400 metres, which amounts to about 4 seconds, just over 4 seconds. Think what that means. That means that he would be crossing the finish line as his nearest competitors had just come off the final bend. He's streets ahead of the competitors. There is no way on the face of this earth that he would be allowed to compete under those circumstances. But duly imagine if in the same way as we're claiming that, well, then cross-sex hormone therapy will make the difference, the people that supply these blades said, okay, we've come up with an action. Let's call it Action X. And Action X makes the difference. Okay. That applying Action X to these blades will take away that performance advantage. And it doesn't matter what Action X is. Action X could be the carbon fibre blade, so it could be reducing the numbers of layers of carbon fibre sheet in the makeup, increasing or reducing the modulus of carbon fibre used, changing the resin that's involved in curing them, changing the layering, the way that you lay the sheets and the directions of the carbon fibres. It could involve something like just painting some pretty stripes on it or sticking a toffee on the back of each one of the blades to alter the resonance frequencies of the blades, right? It could be anything, but they propose an Action X and say, yeah, that's going to make the difference. Are you honestly telling me that then our position should be to just assume that that makes the difference up until the point where the IAAF can gather the data to show that it doesn't, and at the point where the IAAF gathers the data to show that it doesn't, they can just say, well, we'll stick another toffee. Let's have 2 toffees on the back of each blade. You have to be kidding me, right? We're not now starting from a neutral position. We're not now starting from a position of no knowledge that these things provide an advantage. We're starting from a neutral position of knowing that there is at least a 10 or 11% advantage, and that is the position that we have with regard to athletes that have undergone male development, male puberty, and have male hormone levels, then competing in a category designed for biological females. At the point where you start identifying as a woman, you still maintain all of those advantages. And then what is being claimed is that Action X, which in this case is a hormonal reduction of exogenous testosterones in the body, will do the trick, that will remove all those advantages. Surely you can see that that is a very, very different position to a position where we're just trumping up, well, he's wearing a prosthetic leg. Yeah, that probably provides an advantage, with no prehistory of understanding of what provides an advantage and what does not. A very, very different set of circumstances. You may be interested to know, by the way, that the Court of Arbitration for Sport takes a slightly different side to this, a more pragmatic approach. And what it has said to the IAAF is that you are the major stakeholder. You are the one with the resources. Actually, it behooves you to try and evidence this from both sides, whether we're talking about trans women competing in female sport or whether we're talking about biological males with significant intersex conditions who are legally female, like Caster Semenya competing. It behooves the IAAF to try and research this from a neutral perspective and find where the truth lies. It is not enough for them to sit back and say, well, we're just going to render you ineligible for that category unless you can prove otherwise. Neither is it okay for the IAAF to say, do you know what, just compete and we're not even going to look into it. It behooves the IAAF to get to the bottom of this in either direction, and I think that is a very sensible approach from the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and contrasts in some ways to these philosophical debates that we are having with regard to this. Okay, let me move you now on to another chunk of essence of thought, and this is a really interesting one.
It's you who needs to supply evidence before you can even begin to argue that trans women have an advantage. But why is that the case? Well, in my response to this argument in Woodford's Mistakes in Many video, I bring it back to a very important fact. We are discussing a person's human rights. Said rights include the right to equality and non-discrimination, the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, the right to sexual and reproductive health, the right to work and to the enjoyment of just and favourable conditions of work, the right to privacy, the right to freedom from torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment and harmful practices, and full respect for the dignity, bodily integrity and bodily autonomy of the person. Now, the rights listed don't come from any article discussing trans female athletes, but rather cis female athletes with some form of intersex status. And I use them as my opening point in my original response to discuss the ways in which blocking trans women or cis women from sports can violate numerous human rights, something which many of Woodford's supporters flat out refuse to acknowledge.
Okay, so the claim that he's making is that in some ways the likes of me and a lot of others are refusing to acknowledge this human rights argument that he makes. I'll come to that in a minute, and I think at the end of it he'll probably rather wish that I hadn't. But before I do that, just let me say that I think I have a somewhat different understanding of what human rights are and are not compared to essence of thought. I don't know exactly what he regards them as, but I regard them as a kind of simplified expression of our human aspirations in a codified form. But I do not regard that codification as somehow leading to those statements transcending into some kind of ethereal realm of objective moral facts. Neither do I expect human rights to be applied without thinking as some kind of inflexible moral diktat, but I expect them to be a starting point, a reference point around which we frame an argument. Duly, in the case of this, the Court of Arbitration for Sport took this into account. They deemed that discrimination had taken place, but they regarded it as a proportionate means to achieve a legitimate aim, which is the way that legally you look at things involving human rights, and they found in favour of the IAAF. Whereas Essence of Thought wants to take some kind of, well, what amounts to some kind of deontological masturbation, quite frankly. And I'm afraid as a result of that, he has sprayed video after video with his ill-placed intellectual load. That is not a game of soggy video that I want to play with Essence of Thought. But that isn't why I haven't acknowledged his argument. I haven't acknowledged his argument because he hasn't given me anything worthy even of acknowledgement. But he's pushing me now, so let me show you a clip from his original video and I'll show you exactly what I mean.
Now, on the 1st of November of 2018, the IAAF implemented a new policy which seemed to have been designed to specifically target people such as Caster Semenya. This prompted investigation by the United Nations Human Rights Council in its 40th session. Said session took place between the 25th of February and the 22nd of March 2019.
So the claim that he's making here is a pretty impressive one. That the United Nations were so concerned over this that they launched an investigation, was his word, and that this was presented as a report at the 40th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Duly, I read the document that he linked, the document that he has been linking ever since, and as a person who has read more than his fair share of bloody conference resolutions over the years, I read this and I thought, this doesn't read like an investigation, this doesn't read like a report, this reads like a bloody conference resolution. So I did what perhaps Essence of Thought should have actually done himself, which was to go to the United Nations Human Rights Council's website to see what this document actually was. Duly, at the 40th session, 83 reports were submitted into a whole manner of things: child torture, child prostitution, slavery, human rights abuses in a whole array of countries, albinism, and the prejudice that albino people suffer in different countries, but nothing on this. 83 reports, not a single one of them was on this issue. But what also went forwards at that conference were 29 conference resolutions. Surprise, surprise, all of which were passed, because if you've ever listened to people go through conference resolutions, they just go through them one after another and everybody sticks their hand up and then they move on to the next one, because most of them don't give a crap. They don't understand what they're about. They're not interested in those issues. And any party that is involved can submit a conference resolution. That is the nature of them. What we're talking about here, folks, is not an investigation. It's not a report. It's a bloody conference resolution. Who possibly would submit a conference resolution criticising the IAAF for the way they are treating South African athletics superstar Caster Semenya? I wonder. Let me read you this. Geneva, 22nd of March 2019. The United Nations Human Rights Council has adopted, without a vote, a resolution that expresses concern about existing discriminatory regulations, rules and practices that require some women and girl athletes to medically reduce their blood testosterone levels by undergoing unnecessary, humiliating and harmful medical procedures or hormone therapy in order to participate in women's events in competitive sports. The resolution brought by South Africa. South Africa. Yes, South Africa, who boasts at the government level and in terms of the sporting body Athletics South Africa now has a history going back several years of making outrageous, provocative statements aimed at the IAAF and the Court of Arbitration for Sport in a bid to try and coerce them into finding in their favour. Let me read you a couple of recent quotes. Sports Minister Thokozile Zasa said the regulations trample on the human rights and dignity of the 28-year-old who was named one of Times Magazine's 100 most influential people of 2019. Athletics South Africa said it was deeply disappointed and profoundly shocked. We are reeling in shock at how a body held in high esteem like Cass can endorse discrimination without flinching. Listen to this bit. South Africa knows discrimination better. And Cass has seen it fit to open the wounds of apartheid, a system of discrimination condemned by the whole world as a crime against humanity. And this is typical of the type of coercive, hyperbolic rhetoric that Athletic South Africa and the South African government have used in relation to this affair. They actually put Essence of Thought to shame in terms of their hyperbole. And yet Essence of Thought, you've got to be kidding me, pal. You are telling me, right, that at the same time that the South African government and Athletic South Africa are underwriting the legal action that Caster Semenya is taking against the IAAF, taking them to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, that same South African government has gone to the United Nations Human Rights Council and, surprise, surprise, drafted a conference resolution trying to pressurise and coerce the Court of Arbitration for Sport just 5 or 6 weeks before they're due to give their verdict. And you dress that up as an investigation by the United Nations. Perhaps what you should have done somewhere along the line is to take a little bit of that time that you spent gloating smugly that Stephen Woodford Rationality Rules had actually inadvertently quoted Wikipedia rather than the source he had intended to quote, which actually only meant the difference between a professional title for an individual. If you'd spent a fraction of that time investigating what document you were actually talking about, right, maybe you wouldn't have made this blooper, which is an absolute order of magnitude greater. You thought you'd got a bit of a gotcha there. This is a Noel's golden gotcha in relation to what you had pulled off there. But I tell you what we'll do. Right, let's just pretend that it wasn't South Africa, that this wasn't just a politically motivated act to try and pressurise the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and let's try and take this document seriously, okay? It comes out with this ridiculous shopping list of human rights abuses. What does it talk about? The right to equality and non-discrimination, the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, the right to sexual and reproductive health, the right to work and to the enjoyment of just and favourable conditions of work, the right to privacy, the right to freedom from torture and other cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment or punishment, and full respect for the dignity, bodily integrity and bodily autonomy of the person. Nowhere within this conference resolution does it explain how a single one of these things apply to the case in hand. And duly I note that you didn't bother doing it either. You left it up to the good viewer to try and somehow shoehorn these into the case that was under consideration, because I presume even you couldn't figure out how some of these were expected to fit. This is just a sodding shopping list that the South African government has picked up to try and pull off this coercive little trick. And even then, it doesn't say that these human rights have been violated. It says may contravene international human rights norms and standards. May not. Maybe not. Maybe the centre of the moon, Essence of Thought, is made out of cheese. We won't know until we dig down into it just to be sure. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe these are, maybe these aren't. Is this honestly the best that you can come up with? If that's the best that you can come up with, I don't need to acknowledge that, right? Because you've got a conference resolution by South Africa as a political ploy to try and pressure the Court of Arbitration for Sport in its ongoing legislative action against the IAAF. You've got to be kidding me, pal.
Now, how does the way cis intersex athletes are treated relate to trans athletes? Well, for a start, both have atypical female bodies, which many argue offers them unfair advantage over non-intersex cis women.
Okay, yes, I get it. An atypical female body. And I suppose, do I have an atypical female body as well? Do I? Shall we go through the list, shall we? 46 XY chromosomally, a set of testes rather than a set of ovaries. Having gone through a male puberty rather than a female puberty. During that and subsequent to that, kicking out male levels of testosterone, serum testosterone in the blood, and having a body that is sensitive to androgens such as that, okay? Yeah, oh, you think I'm talking about me? No, I'm talking about Caster Semenya. I could be talking about me, but I was talking about Caster Semenya. This is your atypical female body with some kind of intersex condition that you keep rattling on about. The truth of the situation is somewhat different to the language you keep shrouding misleadingly it all in. The truth of the situation is that the DSD regulations as presently formulated by the IAAF effectively apply maybe to people who legally are female but who are biologically male but with a certain specific set of intersex conditions such that they tend to be assumed female at birth. That is what we're talking about. That is what you're dressing up as atypical female bodies. If they have atypical female bodies, you explain to me why I don't.
It's holding their rights at ransom unless they medicalise themselves to align with Woodford's perverse idea of fairness, which in the case of gay and bisexual trans people, or trans people dating other non-medically transitioning trans people, borders on eugenics through coerced sterilisation. And that may sound dramatic, but I'd like to remind you that in many countries, including 20 EU nations and Japan, part of the condition to be legally recognised as their gender is sterilisation.
So it took me a little while to understand exactly what he was driving at here, but I think that his problem is that he has some issue with the idea that a biologically male person may have to take some steps to compete in a category intended for biological females, and some of those steps may impact upon their ability to produce sperm. I think that's what he's getting at here. It's a bit like me taking issue with the fact that somebody who is 6'5", if they wanted to compete as a flyweight boxer, would have to be at the point of anorexia, almost at the point where they were going to die, to get down to that weight category, and in some ways that's an infringement of their human rights. It's almost a crazy argument to make at this point, but when you realise that he's setting this up to justify his big reveal in a minute, which is equally as crazy, you'll understand why he's done this.
And do note that nowhere in the United Nations Human Rights Council report do they even discuss whether or not intersex people had an advantage or not, because it was irrelevant.
Do you know what? It's probably making you cringe even listening to this. Now you know what I've told you. The reason it wasn't included in the report is A, because it wasn't a bloody report to begin with. It was a conference resolution. And B, because it was a conference resolution brought forward by bias to the eyeballs South Africa. Why would South Africa include something in the conference resolution which would argue against the political motivations that led them to create the conference resolution in the first place? The mind boggles essence of thought, doesn't it? Jesus Christ. Look, this was all setting up anyway for his big reveal, which came next, and I won't beat around the bush with regard to this. What the big reveal consisted of was him now pointing out that actually his actual position is not that trans women should be able to compete if they have taken HRT to lower their testosterone and performance levels down. Actually, as far as he's concerned, it doesn't matter. As long as you identify as a woman, that as far as he's concerned, you ought to be able to compete in a protected category designed to protect biological females from those who have the insuperable advantages of having gone through male development and having male hormonal levels, even if you have gone through male development and still have those male hormonal levels. I think this will have come as something of a shock to a number of people. But he preceded the video with this tweet, so we knew what was coming. This is what he tweeted. Writing is going well. I'm finishing up with discussion on the whole premise of banning any trans women from competing now that various cis people have forwarded my position, softening the impact of when I forwarded it openly. In brackets, it was hinted at in the first video. And duly, the video was released and he outlined his true position, and he effectively tries to make this claim. It's not one I buy, by the way. I'll tell you what I think the truth is in a few minutes, but he tries to make the claim that effectively this was some kind of intellectual exercise in YouTube ponage. He did not want to conflate his real positions with him being able to argue the science with Stephen Woodford and show just how much better he is at interpreting the science than Woodford. He feels he has done that now, so now he's at a point he can tell us that actually, as far as he's concerned, he couldn't give a crap about the science. He couldn't give a crap about whether trans women have a performance advantage, even if it's an overwhelming performance advantage. The principle for him is that if you identify as a woman, then you can compete in a protected category in athletics designed to ring fence biologically female athletes. A position that was echoed only a couple of days beforehand, in fact, by Godless Cranium, who released quite a remarkable tweet that effectively, to give the evidence he's talking about, you'd need a pile of female sporting corpses to do so. This was what Godless Cranium had to say. Even if the science was right, it wouldn't change my stance unless they were at such an advantage that it put people's lives at risk. And so here we are, an Essence of Thought has finally come clean and removed the ambiguity about what his real position is. And I have to say personally, if you will allow me this, I feel somewhat vindicated and a little bit smug. And to try and explain why I feel a little bit smug about this, I want to play you a short clip from my original critique of Essence of Thought's original response to Stephen Woodford that I released on the 9th of April, just 3 days after Essence of Thought's original video on the subject. And what he says is the United Nations have said that this is a human rights violation against women, right? That biological females effectively should have to suppress their hormones to compete in some cases. Women shouldn't have to do it. And then he says, so the same is true of trans women, because, hey, trans women are women. So just think about what he's saying here. That isn't saying that it's okay for trans women to compete if they've suppressed their hormones. What it's saying is it is a human rights violation if trans women should have to suppress their hormones before they compete, because trans women are women, and the United Nations have said that it's a human rights violation to expect a woman to suppress her hormones before she can compete in any of your sports. It's really interesting. It's really important that you recognize that that is what his actual position is. That is the argument that he was making in that video, despite the fact that he spent 3 fucking quarters of that video talking about hormone levels and how, according, in his view and according to the paltry amounts of evidence that we have, suppressing the hormone levels the playing field. So the reason that I feel so smug about this is not because I saw it right from the start. As Essence of Thought says, it was hinted at in that first video. It's because I took quite a lot of crap for spelling it out, for saying this is Essence of Thought's real position, and this is Essence of Thought telling you in coded language it's their position. I got accused of strawmanning him, misrepresenting him, trying to manipulate his words, trying to mislead people, trying to deviate the conversation from the conversation and the positions that are actually being maintained. And it turns out I was right all along on this. Here is a recent comment that was left. I don't collate and curate these kinds of comments, but I went looking for the most recent one. This was left on a video that I made, A Brace of Dramas, where I reiterated the point with relation to essence of thought. This was a video from only about a week ago. This is the comment that was left. Absolutely no one has made the argument that trans women should compete without hormone suppression. All you're doing is nitpicking on people's wording and extrapolating that to ridiculous conclusions the people would have actually expressed if that's what they believed. You're engaging in the most blatant, ridiculous example of erecting a strawman argument in order to knock it down. It's embarrassing. Meanwhile, when people have made stronger arguments or more polite arguments, you seem to pretend they don't exist. You have the ability to help make this community-wide conversation more constructive, and instead you have just made it more toxic. I guess that's more gratifying for you. What is gratifying for me is that I was actually right in that all along, and what's probably less gratifying for that particular commenter, and I know this is their tweet, because they went on to talk about TUEs and then made this tweet only about an hour later, is that, as you can see, they went and tweeted Essence of Thought to say, hey, look at this comment that I've left backing you up on Noel Plum's video. Have a look at it. Maybe it will be of some use to you. Essence of Thought never responded to it, no doubt, because they read the comment and thought, yeah, actually that is my position, and Noel Plum's right on that, and you have just accused him of a whole slew of things which are simply not true. Essence of Thought, then, in this video, went on to try and create this smokescreen as to why he hadn't come out with it right from the word go. I don't buy any of that, by the way. What I think is the case is that Essence of Thought knew that if they'd come out with this straight away, that they would have lost a lot of support. The majority of people who have taken Essence of Thought's position believe that it's right that trans women should compete in the category for female athletes, but only if they have had hormone replacement therapy. And if right at the outset Essence of Thought had come out and said the opposite, they'd have gone, whoa, hang on a minute, that's not what we believe. Instead, what he has played is an absolute blinder. He has played one of the perfect radicalisation tactics. It might sound easy, but it isn't. What he has done is he has allowed these people to nail their flags to the mast. The videos have come, the vitriol's raised, people have become more and more polarised, and now these people are fully committed on Essence of Thought's side, and now at this point he can reveal what his true position is, and what do these people do? You can tell if you go and look at the comments on his video, right? There is ne'er a single bit of criticism as his true position, despite the fact, if you look at the comments on his earlier videos, a lot of them were saying, well, yes, you do obviously have to have had hormone replacement therapy. It's an absolute masterstroke. He has left his supporters in a position where they either walk away with some egg on their face or just allow themselves to be radicalised into his new position. The truth of the matter is that effectively in saying what he's saying, Essence of Thought has said to the majority of people who are siding with him, you are transphobes. You are transphobic. Your position is transphobic. Unless you adopt this position that anyone who identifies as a woman gets to compete in this category, then you are holding a transphobic position. And his masterstroke is, it seems to have done the trick, and nobody is arguing. None of his supporters are arguing with him over that. At this point, they are just too invested. And I have to say, although I had seen his position right from the off, what I hadn't seen is the game he was playing. And it's a very clever game. And this is how he sells it.
What I hope this segment highlights is that this was and has always been my stance during this entire thing. So the next question becomes, why haven't I made that clearer throughout my videos? Well, when I was writing my original script, I had to ask myself, how would people react to this if I, a trans person, was the one who forwarded said position first? At the time I told myself that if I waited, perhaps a few cis people would push that boat out there in a more overt manner, at which point said position would undoubtedly appear more reasonable to cis people, allowing me to do the same.
So I know what you'll be thinking at this point. Who is this army of cis voices that has already made this point? Well, it turns out to involve a hangout that you will have never seen and the Amazing Atheist. And that's about it.
As women, intersex cis women like Semenya have the right to play regardless of birth-based advantage, something that both Tracy Harris and Jen Peoples touched upon on the Godless Bitches show. Hell, even TJ Kirk, as much as he is a dishonest bastard when it comes to talking about me, got the fact that if you see trans women as women, then you have no basis whatsoever to exclude them from women's sport.
And so that's it. We have a godless bitches hangout of such supreme ignorance to the Caster Semenya situation that they seem to believe she's some kind of biological female with magical ovaries that can produce more than 10 nanomoles of testosterone. And then we have the Amazing Atheist. I have to say, he says even TJ Kirk. What he means by that is the only other person is TJ Kirk. That is how desperate he is that he has to quote TJ Kirk. And I have to say, it kind of takes my breath away. All the criticism that he has levelled at Stephen Woodford for quoting Joe Rogan, who at least knows something about sport, for crying out loud. And yet when it suits him, he's happy to quote the Amazing Atheist for support. Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful is that. But anyway, what I want to do is let me play you a clip of what TJ Kirk, the Amazing Atheist, has to say, because I want to talk about what he had to say.
And we all agree, well, we don't all agree, but a lot of us agree that the treatment for that is, well, we have to treat you as a woman, and we're going to give you hormones, and we're going to, surgically alter your body to whatever extent you're comfortable with to make your, outward appearance more in line with the feelings you have inside. And society has come around, a lot of it has, to the idea that trans women are every bit as much women as any other woman. And if you are one of the people who agrees with that statement, then there's no basis for you saying, well, they can't compete in women's sports, though.
So the reason that I play you that is that I have a lot of time for that logic. I have a lot of sympathy for the reasoning there, which is that if we are going to say that trans women are women, as we are, then what basis do you deny them competing in a category that is claimed to be for women? On what basis would you tell them that they have to compete in a category that is labelled for men? He finds that objectionable, and so do I. So did I back at the beginning of April when I made that video solving the gender conundrum, where I proposed these new categories for sport. Where I disagree with TJ Kirk is in his conclusions. What he seems to see is that there is a difference between our sporting intentions and the labels that we are applying to the categories within sport. And he's saying we have to abandon our intentions and stick with the labels. I'm saying that there is a better solution, which is better labels and better categories. Let's give our categories, let's choose appropriate categories and give them labels that are appropriate to the boundaries of segregation that we are trying to police. Just to demonstrate how bad things are at present, we have these categories that are labelled men's and women's sport, but what about people who are non-gender binary? Essence of Thought himself, herself, their self, he doesn't mind any set of pronouns, identifies as non-gender binary. If Essence of Thought was to compete in sport, admittedly something that looks somewhat unlikely, looks like if he picked up a set of darts he'd probably have an attack of the vapours, but nevertheless if he was, he would be forced to pick a side. He would be forced to identify as either a man or a woman in sporting terms. There is no need for that. Gender identity is not relevant to sport, so why are we giving our sporting categorizations labels based on gender identity? It makes absolutely no sense, especially that isn't what we are looking as the relevant metric, the relevant axis upon which we choose to differentiate, in terms of which we choose to segregate. What is a relevant metric is biological femaleness. So this is why I propose the categories that I have proposed: an open category and a female category. Neither of those two categories make any statement whatsoever as to your gender identity. Competing in either category, in the female category, you could be a cis woman, you could be a trans man who has not had cross-sex hormone therapy. The category says nothing about whether you are cis or trans, whether you identify as a man or a woman. The open category says nothing about your biological sex, nothing about your gender identity, nothing about your legal sex, nothing about whether you identify as a man, as a woman, or as non-gender binary. And so the advantage of the system I propose, amongst many other advantages it has, is that this objection of not treating trans women as women anymore just disappears, because nobody is categorized on the basis of whether you identify as a man or a woman, and none of the categories have any implication whatsoever as whether your gender identity is man or woman. Instead, effectively, what we are doing is creating categories that line up with our actual sporting intentions, rather than trying to fit it into a binary of gender identity that has absolutely no relevance to sport whatsoever. Okay, I think that deals with the biggest chunk of Essence of Thought's video. There are three other issues that I want to talk about: powerlifting, his discussion of centrism, and then the business of being banned in sport. These are more minor issues, but let's deal with them now. Okay, powerlifting. In relation to this subject, can please everybody, and this includes Stephen Woodford as well as Essence of Thought, please stop talking about powerlifting. It's a really, really poor sport, not least because of the way it's factored. The IPF, the International Power Federation, I believe are the only affiliated powerlifting group with the IOC. The IOC brings with it expectations of doping control. It's a little bit of a wild west beyond there, it has to be said, with lots of different federations and pretty sketchy doping controls. Duly, when you are comparing a biological female performing a lift with a trans woman competing a lift, there is every expectation of the top of each federation that the athlete may have taken performance enhancements in the form at least of anabolic steroids, but possibly also human growth hormone or insulin as well. So please be really careful. It's not a very good example. And the other problem is that people are liable to start making comparisons across federations. You cannot do that. If when I mention to you a bench shirt, your initial vision is buying a shirt from this shop, then you really should not be talking about powerlifting. And I suspect that is the position that Essence of Thought is in. Let me read you about, from Wikipedia entry for bench shirts, while showing you a video of the bodybuilder Johnny Jackson trying to inch his way into a bench shirt. You look at how restrictive it is. You imagine the impact that has on when he has it on. A bench shirt is a stiff supportive shirt used to improve performance in the bench press, most often in powerlifting competitions. Different powerlifting federations have different rules governing allowed equipment. For example, the only supportive equipment allowed by the 100% Raw Powerlifting Federation for bench press is a leather belt, whereas the International Powerlifting Federation stipulates that support shirts must be of 1-ply stretch thickness. As the same lifter's performance may vary significantly depending on the presence and design of a bench shirt. For example, Scott Mandelson, 1,030 pounds shirted, his best unshirted performance 715 pounds. Wow, only about 70% as much. Records across different federations or categories may not be directly comparable. You don't say. Bear that in mind. Look at Johnny Jackson trying to get in that. If you wear a good bench shirt. You can't even pull your arms back without having a substantially heavy barbell helping you do so. If you have a squat suit on, a decent squat suit, you can't even get down into a squat unless you've got a sufficiently heavy barbell on your back. Right, so these are not comparable. This is the list of the garments that the IPF, the International Powerlifting Federation, allows in its competition. You will note that they allow bench shirts, squat suits, and dead suits in their competition. And now listen to Essence of Thought.
Just the other day, a cis woman named Amanda Lawrence, competing in a different division, took home 3 new world records, whilst one of her fellow competitors took home the last for bench press, completely resetting the world records for their weight class in said event. Now strangely, if Mary Gregory was competing with Amanda Lawrence in the division Amanda plays in, they'd both be in the same weight class in that division, meaning that if Mary had set her division records there, Amanda would have taken all of Mary's division titles, whilst her fellow competitor, Daniela Mello, would have taken Mary's bench record, at least on a division level. Sadly, when it comes to world records, the dividing weight is 82.5 kg. Mary weighs a kg short of that at 81.3 kg, whilst Amanda weighs just over a kg above that at 83.5 kg. Daniela weighed 83.55 kg, which is why when both of them pulled the same total weight, Amanda took the record. So I can't compare them directly on world record.
The Essence of Thought here is talking about stuff that is just way beyond his sporting comprehension. Amanda Lawrence is competing in the International Powerlifting Federation. She will be wearing a bench shirt, wearing a squat suit, wearing a dead suit. Mary Gregory is competing in a 100% raw competition, lifting without any of those. Now, I don't know the genuine absolute situation with Mary Gregory and Amanda Lawrence, so I'm not asking you to draw any conclusions from that, other than the fact that when he says I can't compare these things, it's not because of this minor weight differential putting them in different weight categories. It's because one of them is lifting equipped and the other one is lifting 100% raw. And if you don't appreciate that, then please don't talk about powerlifting, for crying out loud. He also said this.
Now, what really drives home the tragedy that Woodford has chosen to be a part of is the fact that even though Mary was stripped of all trophies and records after complaints were lodged against her, she still intends to take part in weightlifting via refereeing.
Okay, so this is just a little bee in my bonnet. But can people please stop conflating weightlifting and powerlifting as if they're the same thing? If you don't know the difference, what that shows is you don't know what you're talking about. Again, I'm afraid. They're not even similar things in actual fact. They may look similar to the uninformed. It just looks like a different set of lifts, but they are not. Effectively, counterintuitively, weightlifting is a test of power and powerlifting is a test of strength. Weightlifting includes ballistic lifts. The faster you can generate that force, the more you can lift. Powerlifting is controlled lifts and depends upon the strength that you can generate to lift the weight. Do not conflict powerlifting and weightlifting, please. And yet it's part of this discussion. I've heard it happen again and again and again. Okay, can we move on to discussing centrism? It's not particularly something I want to talk about, but it's something that Essence of Thought felt the need to bring up. Boy, oh boy, did he do a crap job of this.
And you do yourself no favours on this account with your opening.
The debate over trans women in sports and athletics, and specifically over whether they have an unfair advantage, has existed for quite some time. On one side, somewhere on the right, let's say, people are acting as if trans people still have, despite hormone therapy, pretty much all of the benefits that they receive from male puberty. And the more dogmatic among this group are straight up calling trans women men in dresses. While on the other side, somewhere on the left, let's say, people are acting as if trans women pretty much no longer have any of the benefits that they receive from male puberty. And the more dogmatic among this group are straight up insisting that sex itself is merely a social construct. The truth on the matter, however, is where it normally is, between the two extremes.
The dishonest attempt to portray both sides of a debate as some dogmatic extreme always benefits the most dogmatic party, since it reduces their opposition to their level. A fact which explains why people on the right, such as Donald Trump, and those who are starting to make a career from pandering to the right, such as Woodford, love the false equivalence. one would certainly expect someone with a literal game on fallacies, both formal and informal, to recognize and therefore not forward the informal fallacy of argument to moderation, also known as argument for middle ground. So what you do here cannot be an accident. You are playing the centrist game on purpose.
I have to say, if it serves the most dogmatic party, what is your problem, pal? Because I have to say, regardless of right or wrong here, I've not heard a single person in this discussion who is more dogmatic, who is more inflexible than you are. As far as you're concerned, you're not concerned about evidence, you're not concerned about impact. It's just a human rights situation based upon a document that was created by the bloody South African government as part of a political agenda to pressurise caste. Well, that doesn't matter, does it? You've decided it's a human rights violation. Anybody who disagrees with you is spreading dangerous transphobic narratives. You could not be any more dogmatic in this, could you? Any more inflexible, any more unreasonable. So if anybody is going to benefit as a result of dogmatism benefiting, it's going to be you, isn't it? What was your problem with that if that was true? But what really got me here was just for somebody who always claims to be as logical as you are. When you say a statement and somebody disagrees with you, you go through your statement word by word, don't you? Right? And if there's any way in which you can say, well, that wasn't exactly what I said, you're reading more into it, how come you don't adopt the same standards when you are dealing with other people? What Stephen Woodford did here, he did not make a philosophical statement that the truth always lies intermediate between two extremes. That is not what he said. He said normally the truth lies between two extremes, and I believe that is the case here. That is an observation, not a philosophical statement. It is not a statement that is amenable to being wrong in a philosophical sense, because it is a general observation he is making, coupled with the facts saying, well, I think this is another example of that. What I have to say is a very reasonable general observation. Most subjects that we discuss, most subjects that are a result of contention and conjecture, have arguments on both sides, and it normally isn't the most extreme and radical arguments on each side that have some value. That doesn't mean it's the dead centre point, does it? But it means, as he says, the truth lies between those two extremes, generally, normally, and he believes that is also the case here. You cannot tie him to a logical fallacy when he isn't making a statement that is amenable to that, when he's making a general observation. And what gets under my skin is if this was the other way around and you made a statement like that, you would happily tear someone a new arsehole for making the type of crap response that you made to that. But then it got worse, didn't it? I mean, really, you showed yourself up with this next bit. I'll just play the tape.
Also, when I said you had done a Carl Benjamin in my response to your mistakes of many video, due to not reading the figure annotation you showed on screen that refuted your very argument, I didn't mean for you to actually go full-blown centrist. Just to recap the many ways centrism fails, gay people are not somewhat mentally ill, slavery is not somewhat okay, and we shouldn't kill off half of all Jews.
Jesus Christ. When I listen to that, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. You're out of your depth, aren't you? You're just winging it at that point. If that is honestly what you think, being serious, if you honestly think that is what centrism is, just looking at what the two extremes of any argument is and saying, I'm just going to take the exact midpoint, I think maybe it may be worth you reading up on what centrism is before talking publicly in front of thousands of people what centrism is. Because all you're doing is erecting a giant monument to your own fucking pig ignorance, quite honestly there. Peter, let's just move on to the subject of banning, okay? Because this is kind of relevant. Peter, in this video, didn't mention banning very much, but he did mention it in that tweet. Writing is going well. I'm finishing up with discussion on the whole premise of banning trans women from competing now that various cis people have forwarded my position. Let me just lay this on the line here, Peter. Stop lying. Every time you or anybody else describes this as a ban, please stop lying. Nobody is getting banned from sport here. It's a question of eligibility. Mike Tyson was banned from boxing, if you recall, for a period, because he bit part of Evander Holyfield's ear off. That was a ban. It didn't mean that he just couldn't compete as a fucking flyweight because he's too heavy, right? He couldn't, right from the word go. That wasn't a ban. That wasn't a human rights violation because he'd have to make himself anorexic to compete at that weight. He was still eligible. He wasn't banned. He could compete. He just had to compete in the category he was eligible for, which was heavyweight. That isn't what a ban looks like. When you are banned, you cannot compete in any category. That is what a ban is. Telling somebody they cannot compete in the category of their choosing is not the same as saying they are banned. So when a trans woman who is not on HRT is told she cannot compete in the female category, when a biological male with an intersex condition like Caster Semenya is told that she cannot compete in the female category, that is not a ban, that is just an ineligibility. It is no more of a ban than when I am told I cannot compete in the female category. Why? Because there is another category we are eligible for. If there is no category you are eligible for, that is when it is a ban. Stop pretending that people are being banned. If they're banned, it means they cannot compete at all. It doesn't mean they just cannot compete in whatever category they personally choose to compete in. I want to read you something. Let me leave you with this before I'll give you my final words afterwards, but let me leave you with this. This is from the IAAF, their response to the Swiss tribunal suspending the Court of Arbitration for Sports' decision. Listen to this. The IAAF fully respects each individual's personal dignity and supports the social movement to have people accepted in society based on their chosen legal sex and or gender identity. However, the IAAF is convinced there are some contexts, sport being one of them, where biology has to trump identity. The IAAF also believes that the right to participate in sport does not translate to a right to self-identify into a competition category or an event, or to insist on inclusion in a preferred event, or to win in a particular event without regard to the legitimate rules of the sport and the criteria for entry. It is legitimate for all sport in general and for the IAAF in particular to create a protected category for females and to base eligibility for this category on biology and not gender identity. The crucial point was accepted and emphasised by the CAS on its 30th of April 2019 decision to uphold the DSD regulations. To define the category based on something other than biology would be category defeating and would deter many girls around the world from choosing competitive and elite sport after puberty. I can accept there is a problem with the labelling of sport based on biological sex using gender identity labels, men and women. I accept that is an issue. I've proposed a way that we can deal with that. I accept that. I can accept that we can do better. I suggest that we repurpose sport in a way that is more inclusive and stops referring to people by their gender identity when that is not appropriate and when that is not the intention of the category boundaries. I accept that. But please, please, please stop misportraying eligibility restrictions as bans, because they are not bans. Okay, that's the end of the video. If you watched it, I hope you've got something out of it. If you enjoy my material generally, I'll leave you the links to my Patreon, Subscribestar and PayPal recurring payments. Your support is very much appreciated if you enjoy my work. Thank you for watching, and bye.